In the shadowed streets and quiet villages of medieval Europe, the line between law and superstition was often blurred. It is a curious and unsettling chapter of history that animals, from pigs to insects, could find themselves subjects of legal proceedings. While today such notions seem absurd, in the minds of medieval jurists, clergy, and townsfolk, these trials reflected a serious attempt to maintain divine and social order. The medieval legal system was not only concerned with human behavior, but with ensuring that every creature on earth acted in accordance with God's law. Animals, considered incapable of moral reasoning in the modern sense, were still held accountable for their actions if they caused harm or disruption. One of the most common cases involved pigs. Pigs were often accused of harming children or destroying crops. When such incidents occurred, the community would respond not with mere punishment of the owner, but with formal legal proceedings against the animal itself. In some cases, the pigs were dressed in miniature robes and brought before a court, complete with a magistrate, prosecutor, and witnesses. The animals were assigned defenders, often clergymen, who were expected to argue on behalf of the creature, highlighting mitigating circumstances or the supposed innocence of the accused. These trials were conducted with the same solemnity and procedural rigor applied to human cases, including written records and formal sentencing. The rationale behind these trials was rooted in a combination of religious, social, and moral beliefs. Medieval Europeans believed that animals could act as instruments of divine punishment or as agents of sin if not properly restrained. By prosecuting animals, communities sought to reassert moral order and demonstrate that every act of violence, even that of a beast, demanded acknowledgement and restitution. Legal scholars of the time debated the nuances of culpability, often distinguishing between domesticated animals seen as extensions of their owner's responsibility and wild animals, which could be punished if they repeatedly threatened human society. Some trials were astonishing in their detail and formality. In one documented case, a sow that had killed a child was tried, found guilty, and publicly executed. The execution took the form of hanging or burning, carried out in the presence of the local community as both punishment and deterrent. In other instances, insects, such as swarms of locusts or weevils that ravaged crops, were subjected to symbolic excommunication, with priests performing rites over the afflicted fields as if addressing a criminal congregation. This blending of ritual and law reflected the deeply intertwined nature of spiritual and temporal authority during the medieval period. Moreover, animals were not merely accused of violent crimes. Theft, property damage, and destruction of agricultural produce were also grounds for prosecution. Court records show pigs, horses, and even rats being indicted. When an animal was found guilty, sentences were sometimes carried out against the owner as well, emphasizing the belief that humans bore ultimate responsibility for their charges. Yet the spectacle of trying and executing the animal itself suggests a worldview in which justice was not entirely human-centered. The moral universe demanded accountability from all its inhabitants, and failure to enforce this order risked divine displeasure. These unusual legal practices also reveal the human need to rationalize misfortune. In a world with limited scientific understanding, unexplained injuries or crop failures demanded explanation. Prosecuting an animal offered a sense of control and closure, allowing communities to believe that wrongs could be rectified through formal procedures. The public nature of the trials reinforced social cohesion, serving as a ritualized way to confront fear, grief, and anger. Citizens could witness the enforcement of justice, affirming both the power of the law and the moral order it represented. Historians today examine these trials as a window into medieval thought, illustrating how humans projected concepts of guilt, responsibility, and morality onto the natural world. The legal system's willingness to anthropomorphize animals speaks to a society in which law, religion, and superstition were inseparably linked. It challenges modern assumptions about reason and rationality, offering a glimpse of a world in which the boundaries between the human and animal realms were governed not only by physical interaction, but by moral and spiritual frameworks. Beyond the more notorious cases involving pigs, other animals frequently found themselves in courts across Europe. Cows, goats, and horses could be accused of similar offenses, particularly when their actions resulted in human injury or property damage. In some regions, even ants, mice, and flies faced formal accusations for destroying crops or infesting homes. The scope of these trials suggests that medieval society perceived animals not merely as passive elements of the natural world, but as actors capable of moral and social impact. Each trial was an attempt to restore balance and assert the authority of law over every element of daily life. One notable aspect of these proceedings was the use of professional advocates for the animals. Defending a pig or goat required a nuanced understanding of law, theology, and local customs. Clergy members often stepped into this role, crafting arguments that emphasized mitigating circumstances or questioning the evidence presented. In some cases, the defense could argue that an animal acted instinctively, without malicious intent, or that the owner had taken all reasonable precautions. The presence of a defense counsel lent legitimacy to the trials, reinforcing the perception that the proceedings were serious and binding. The punishments meted out to animals varied widely, reflecting local customs and the nature of the crime. Hanging was a common form of execution for larger livestock, while smaller creatures might be drowned or burned. Public executions were not only punitive but performative, designed to demonstrate the reach of justice and instill communal order. In addition to execution, some sentences involved symbolic acts of penance. For example, animals could be excommunicated, with priests conducting rituals that treated the creature as a spiritually delinquent being. Fields plagued by locusts or other destructive insects might be cursed in a formal ceremony, blending legal, religious, and symbolic practices. Interestingly, the medieval approach to animal trials also underscores the interplay between personal responsibility and collective morality. When an animal was accused of harming humans or damaging property, the owner often faced consequences alongside the animal. Fines, public shaming, or other penalties reinforced the belief that humans were ultimately accountable for the creatures in their care. This dual focus on the animal and its owner highlights the medieval understanding of agency, which extended beyond human behavior to include the management of the natural and animal world. While many of these trials appear bizarre or even comical to modern readers, they were grounded in a coherent worldview. Medieval Europeans operated under the conviction that moral and spiritual order must be enforced consistently. Just as humans were subject to divine law and societal regulations, animals were integrated into this moral universe. If a cow trampled a child or a pig destroyed a harvest, justice demanded a response. These actions were not arbitrary. They reflected deeply held beliefs about causality, responsibility, and the consequences of disorder. Some of the most remarkable cases involved entire communities confronting plagues of animals. Swarms of rats, locusts, or weevils could devastate towns, and legal proceedings were sometimes initiated against the collective guilty population of pests. Priests and magistrates would convene ceremonies and issue proclamations, holding the swarming creatures accountable in a ritualized form of justice. The trials were as much about psychological and social relief as they were about law. By personifying the threat and subjecting it to judicial scrutiny, communities could symbolically reclaim control over chaos and uncertainty. These practices, while seemingly extreme, also reflect the centrality of narrative and ritual in medieval life. Every trial, whether of a pig or a rat, became a story, one that explained misfortune, enforced moral lessons, and reinforced communal bonds. Villagers could witness firsthand the consequences of disorder and sin, even when enacted upon non-human actors. Legal records from the period provide detailed accounts, including charges, witnesses, defenses, and sentences, revealing the seriousness with which these proceedings were undertaken. The sheer meticulousness of documentation underscores that these were not casual or whimsical acts, but a recognized part of the legal and moral system. Furthermore, these trials offer insight into human attempts to understand causality and agency in a world governed by both visible and invisible forces. In the absence of modern scientific explanations, animals became vessels for human anxieties and moral concerns. Prosecuting them allowed communities to address grievances in a tangible, performative way, creating a sense of order where chance, misfortune, or natural instinct had caused disruption. The human need for accountability, combined with religious conviction and social cohesion, made these trials a unique and enduring feature of medieval Europe. Despite the seeming absurdity of these trials, they were not without broader implications for medieval society. They reveal a period in which law, religion, and daily life were intertwined, and where moral and spiritual order was paramount. The prosecution of animals served as a mechanism to reinforce communal values, to educate citizens on acceptable behavior, and to maintain the illusion of control over a world full of uncertainties. Each trial, whether targeting a single pig or a swarm of insects, became a public lesson on the consequences of transgression, offering moral clarity in a landscape often defined by chaos. The phenomenon also underscores the anthropocentric worldview of the time. Humans were seen as the arbiters of justice, capable of imposing moral and legal frameworks on the natural world. By holding animals accountable, society reaffirmed human dominance and the belief that every act, regardless of the actor, could be judged according to the principles of right and wrong. These trials blurred the lines between instinct and intentionality, suggesting that even creatures without conscious understanding of morality could be subjected to judgment. In doing so, medieval Europeans projected human values onto animals, creating a legal and moral universe that encompassed all living beings. Historical accounts from France, Switzerland, and Germany document numerous cases that highlight the formal procedures involved. In some towns, a detailed indictment would be prepared, naming the animal, describing the alleged offense, and listing witnesses. Magistrates presided over the proceedings with solemnity, reading charges aloud and hearing testimony from villagers. When convicted, animals were often executed in public, sometimes in a manner mimicking human punishment. Hanging, drowning, and burning were common methods, each carried out with ritualistic precision. The public spectacle reinforced the authority of the law and served as a dramatic reminder of the consequences of disorder. Clergy played a critical role in bridging the spiritual and judicial aspects of these trials. They often acted as defenders for the animals, framing arguments in theological terms and highlighting the possibility of divine forgiveness. In other cases, they conducted blessings or excommunications, rituals that treated animals as morally accountable beings. This intersection of law and religion underscores the medieval worldview, in which justice was inseparable from morality and spirituality. Every trial, therefore, was both a legal process and a sacred act, reinforcing communal belief in divine oversight and moral accountability. The social dimension of these trials should not be underestimated. They were communal events, drawing villagers together in shared witness of the enforcement of justice. Public executions and rituals provided a structured outlet for fear, grief, and anger, transforming potentially chaotic responses into organized, socially sanctioned actions. In a world where everyday life was subject to disease, famine, and violence, these trials offered a rare opportunity to assert control and reaffirm community norms. The collective experience of witnessing justice, even against non-human actors, strengthened social cohesion and reinforced cultural values. By modern standards, the idea of trying and executing animals may seem cruel, irrational, or even comical. Yet within the context of medieval Europe, these practices were coherent and purposeful. They reflect an era in which humans sought to impose order on a universe perceived as morally significant, where every being had a role and every action had consequences. Animals were participants in this moral universe, and their prosecution was both a practical and symbolic affirmation of societal principles. Far from being mere superstition, these trials were serious undertakings, meticulously documented and rigorously executed. Interestingly, these historical episodes have influenced contemporary discussions about justice, responsibility, and human-animal relationships. They challenge modern assumptions about rationality, highlighting the ways in which cultural, spiritual, and social frameworks shape perceptions of agency and accountability. By studying these trials, historians gain insight into the medieval psyche, into the anxieties, fears, and moral priorities that governed daily life. The prosecution of animals becomes more than an oddity. It becomes a lens through which to understand a civilization striving for order in a world it could only partially comprehend. In conclusion, the trials and executions of animals in medieval Europe stand as one of the most peculiar and revealing chapters of legal history. They illuminate the interconnectedness of law, morality, and religion, and they reveal the human desire to impose meaning and accountability on a complex, often frightening world. From pigs accused of harming children to swarms of locusts facing symbolic excommunication, these cases illustrate a society in which justice extended beyond humanity itself. While these practices may appear absurd today, they offer profound insight into a worldview that saw every creature as bound by moral and spiritual law, where the pursuit of order demanded that even animals answer for their deeds.